those of you who have pets, discover very quickly their personalities. And if you don't, you're pretty blind. They tell you very quickly what they want, and you better listen. I think of our dog, Shadow, who's supposed to be a cockapoo. But I think he's more cocker than poo. He's quite large for a cockapoo. But he has a personality of his own. And when that tail of his starts wagging, you know, he's a happy soul. But animals are great to comfort us and to bring us joy, whether they be cats or dogs, birds. Some people get into ecstasies over pythons and different kinds of animals. The furry kind, and those that are not quite so furry. Little girl comes into this pet shop and says, do you have any rabbits? And the owner looks at her and says, yes, we do. He says, do you want a white rabbit or do you want a fuzzy, cuddly black one? The little girl looks at him and says, well, I don't really care. I don't think my python cares which one. So, not the answer that he expected, but that's the way it goes sometimes. But the devotion of an animal to a person is fantastic. It certainly gives us humans reason to stop and pause. Not a pun intended. Pause, get it? Because the animals have what we refer to as unconditional love. This is the agape that Jesus speaks of when he talks about love for one another. Many years ago, when I was still a student minister in the States, I served a church in Parrishville, New York, and one day had a funeral for an old gentleman who was sort of been a resident of that little town for years. He'd lost his wife some years before that, and he and Raffles, who was a Heinz 57 type pooch, were constantly together, and Pooch was a companion to the old gentleman. But one day the Lord called him home, and I had the funeral for him. The church was full because he was well liked in the community. And the dog tried to get into the church, but nobody would let the dog in. But when we came time to go to the hill where the cemetery was, Raffles came along and lay down beside his master's casket for the committal portion of the service. And when we left to go to our various activities, and there was a reception afterwards, Raffles was left lying by the casket, by the grave. A friend took care of the little dog, but quite often if you were in the cemetery visiting other graves, you would find him still there days and weeks later. That unconditional love should make us sit up and take notice. It is not an easy thing, because sometimes we love one another. If you guarantee you love me, I will love you, but you know, I love you if you do this, but if you don't do that, I'm not going to love you anymore. And we unfortunately come across families that are dysfunctional and split because of a silly little argument 15 years ago. But then, of course, sometimes it's too late to re-reconcile. Sometimes it's too late to set the record straight, so to speak. So we look to the animals because in many respects they provide a quality of life that adults don't seem to. We talk about the Bible and God rather creating the animals some to work, some to be part of our food system, some to comfort, and some to uplift. Nowadays, they seem to be realizing that certain dogs, and maybe cats to a lesser extent, are suitable for visitations to hospitals, to act as service dogs. We all are familiar with the canine dogs when the police go looking for bodies or scents of trying to track down somebody who's missing and that sort of thing. And we find folk who've got Alzheimer's are comforted by the presence of a little furry creature. And children perk up when they see a dog. And even when you're going into the IGA, or, well, sorry, they call it Foodland today, I prefer the IGA. And there's a dog tied to a chair, to a bench there, or maybe the owner's sitting there. How many people come and stop and talk because that person has a dog? They wouldn't bother with it, I would suppose, if the dog wasn't there. They'd go on into the store, but they would stop. And I heard them say, well, I've got a dog at home, and blah, blah, blah. There's a camaraderie there that sort of pulls us together. And in many respects, it's too bad we can't feel the same way about one another as the animals do about us, even if those animals are abused. If you flick through Facebook, there's example after example after example of rescues of animals by people risking sometimes their own lives in order to bring them to safety. And it doesn't matter whether they are dogs or cats or ducks or ducklings, chickens, elephants. They're not restricted. There's a need, and they jump to take care of that need. I often wonder what happened with all those animals in the fires in British Columbia and down in California. How many of those got burned up? How many of them managed to get away? They didn't say much about that, just the people. But the wildlife is just as essential to our system as anything else. So we find this particular day, a day in which we are going to bless one little pussycat. Sorry? Yeah. Bless one little pussycat. And many of you, I think, maybe have dogs or cats at home, but didn't have the courage to bring them. Is that right? Yeah. Because normally we would hold this outside, but not so today. So we find then that we are filled with a sense of gratitude to God for the animals. As I said this morning, coming around that last bend into the village of Halliburton, suddenly stopping dead because in front of me was this little spotted deer standing in the road with his ma and pa up on the grass in the lawn of the house beside the road. And it was surprising because I didn't expect it to be there. And yet, in a way, many times coming into Halliburton, the deer have been on the side of the road or pinching apples from the trees underneath the trees there on the curb going into Halliburton. So you've got to be careful, you've got to keep your eyes open. And it's great to see them there, but not in the road. Not in the road at all. So we find ourselves today reconsidering the power and the love of an animal. This is a short reading, if I can find it, which has to do with heaven. So, listen up. A man and his dog were walking along a road. The man was enjoying the scenery when it suddenly occurred to him that he was dead. He remembered dying, and that the dog walking beside him had been dead for years. He wondered where the road was leading them. After a while, they came to a high white stone wall along one side of the road. It looked like fine marble. At the top of a long hill, it was broken by a tall arch that glowed in the sunlight. When he was standing before it, he saw a magnificent gate in the arch that looked like mother of pearl, and the street that led to the gate looked like pure gold. He and the dog walked toward the gate. Now as he got closer, he saw a man at a desk on one side. When he was close enough, he called out, "Excuse me, where are we?" "This is heaven, sir," the man answered. "Wow. Would you happen to have some water?" the man asked. "Of course, sir. Come right in, and I'll have some ice water brought right up." The man gestured, and the gate began to open. "Can my friend," gesturing toward his dog, "come in too?" the traveller asked. "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't accept pets." The man thought a moment and then turned back toward the road and continued the way he had been going along with his dog. After another long walk, and at the top of another long hill, he came to a dirt road leading through a farm gate that looked as if it had never been closed. There was no fence. As he approached the gate, he saw a man inside, leaning against a tree, reading a book. "Excuse me," he called to the man. "Do you have any water?" "Yeah, sure, there's a pump over there. Come on in." "How about my friend here?" the traveller gestured to the dog. "Oh, there should be a bowl by the pump," he said. They went through the gate, and sure enough, there was an old-fashioned hand pump with a bowl beside it. The traveller filled the water bowl and took a long drink himself. Then he gave some to the dog. When they were full, he and the dog walked back toward the man, who was still standing by the tree. "What do you call this place?" the traveller asked. "This is heaven," he answered. Well, that's confusing," the traveller said. "The man down the road said that was heaven too." "Oh, you mean the place with the gold street and pearly gates?" "No," he says, "that's hell." "Doesn't it make you mad for them to use your name like that?" "No, we're just happy that they screen out the folks who leave their best friends behind." So now you see, sometimes we wonder what happens in this crazy old world. Let us bow our heads in prayer.